Welcome, everybody. We'll start in just a moment, but as you're coming into the room, Kristen, Renee, and I would love to know what's on your mind when it comes to college. What is your top concern for your child about college? If you could put that into the chat, that would be terrific. Thank you so much. That will help guide our discussion. So again, what is your top concern about college when it comes to your student? Throw that in the chat if you don't mind. Thank you. And Kristen, Renee, how are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Doing well.
Excited to be here today.
Awesome. Well, let's see what,
Absolutely.
yeah, me too. Okay, so let's see what we have. Not getting in because of low SAT scores, creating a balanced list, best prep outside of class to build the application, executive function, and staying on top of everything. We can relate to that. Finding the best fit, finding one with an atmosphere that supports mindfulness. Top concern is that she will become overwhelmed with the process of finding the right school. We'll definitely talk about that feeling of overwhelm and how to get around it. And let's see what else. Having a passion project or a hook, whether he will get into his preferred schools, even though he struggles in high school. My child didn't take the SATs. What does that look like for admission? And a number of other things. So we'll be sure that we touch on what is on your mind.
For
All
sure.
right, Kristen and Renee, are you ready to get
Mhm.
started?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody to Beyond the Numbers, how to stand out without a perfect grade point average or test scores. I'm your host, Ann Dolan, and for the last 27 years, my team of educators and college consultants have not only been helping kids to do better in school, but to get through the application process without too much stress and ultimately have lots of options at the end of the day, whether it comes to college or another path. So today I'm so excited to talk specifically about kids that may not be at the very top of their class, but still have tons to offer. And with me today, I have two experts in the house. First, Renee, hello and welcome.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me again today, Anne.
Absolutely. Please meet Renee Minnich. She's a college consultant here with me at Educational Connections. And prior to coming to the company, she was the former Associate Director of Admissions at Rochester Institute of Technology. And in fact, even aside from that position and other roles, she's been in admissions for 28 years and she has reviewed over 20,000 applications. So she knows what it takes for kids to get into college these days. And hello, Kristen, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Ann. Glad to be back.
And please meet Kristin Landis, our other expert this afternoon. Kristin is also a college consultant with me here at Educational Connections. And by the way, both Kristin and Renee work with kids just like yours every day in and day out. And Kristin has supported hundreds of students here at the company through their college admissions process. Before coming here, she was the former University of Virginia admission evaluator for 11 years, reviewing thousands of applications in-state, out-of-state, and international students, and transfers as well. All right, so let's get started. Renee, I'd love to start with you because I think when we consider kids that may be coming to the table with grades that maybe are average or test scores not so great, or maybe they didn't even take the test, what is this holistic admission process and how can it benefit students?
Sure, Anne. I worked for schools that had holistic admission processes, and I really, really love this type of a process. This is where students are considered holistically on things outside of their academic metrics. So they don't just consider a student's GPA or their test scores. The goal is really to understand the student's character, their potential, their unique experiences, and how they might contribute to the college's campus. So the question then comes like, all right, what is considered outside of the academics? Essays, letters of recommendation, extracurricular activities, leadership roles that the student has taken on, work or volunteer experiences, entrepreneurship, personal background and life changes are also taken into consideration. So if a student does disclose some of those things, the admissions office will consider that in evaluating their application. And this type of admission review can be really beneficial to students who don't have the strongest GPA or have had some ups and downs on their transcripts or are choosing not to submit their test scores because things outside of the transcript will be considered and not test scores if they choose not to submit them.
Does every school have this process, or is it just more of the smaller schools?
Every school does not have this process. Some schools really rely on this heavily, and some of them really make decisions just on the academic metrics.
That makes sense. Thank you for sharing that, Renee. All right, let's talk about the personal narrative because that can be really, really powerful. Kristin, I'd love to bring you in and discuss this.
Absolutely. So Renee just totally teed it up for this. So when you're talking about that holistic review, so then you say, okay, well, where do we glean that from? And this is what we call the narrative. The narrative is the alignment of your coursework, your activities, and your interests, especially for students who don't necessarily have the optimal grades or the optimal courses or the optimal scores. This is an area where they can really shine. They're highlighting their strengths, their interests, because colleges are in the business of building communities. Yes, they accept students, but they're also building communities. So when I was at UVA, I was always asking myself the question, what will this student bring to my college environment? What contribution can they make both in and out of the classroom? What type of community citizen are they going to be? And the answer to that is the narrative. What are they passionate about? What makes them tick? What are they interested in? And we look for that in a number of different places. And Renee touched on that too. First of all, we look at your transcript, we look at your courses. You may not realize this, but your transcript actually tells a story about you. How did you use those electives? Did you take classes like engineering or fashion or business to show that interest? And then, I mean, not all students can take APs and IBs and all the highest rigor classes in every core class. There are very few people out there who can do that. So the classes that your child is interested in and that they actually have talent in, maybe you put your foot on the gas in that class, and then maybe you take your foot off the gas in another class. Like I would totally take my foot off the gas in math for sure. And then, as Renee also said, we look at your activities to help with your narrative. How do you choose to spend your time outside of school? I always ask myself two questions. I ask my students two questions. What excites you and what brings you joy? Renee, do you ask your students those same types of questions?
I do the exact same thing because then they kind of light up and they're like, oh, this is what I'm passionate about. And you can see exactly who they are as a person and what kind of a student they'd be on campus too. And that's what the colleges are trying to figure out by looking at that personal narrative.
Exactly.
I love that. Thank you both so much. How do you use the fall, like this time of year, to really as your advantage? Because we've got the whole year ahead, depending on the grade of the student. I'm sure we have parents of 9th graders, 10th graders, 11th, and maybe some seniors. What's the best way to really help colleges see all that you have to offer?
I think that's a great question, Ann. And I think the answer is similar, but also different depending on what grade level you're in. So, right now I'm meeting with students of all different grade levels as we go into the fall, and we're planning out our fall. What will it look like? What kind of things will I get involved in? How am I going to take advantage of the fall? So the first thing I like to talk about is clubs and activities. Most schools will have a club fair in the fall that students can go to and get involved in different things. I'm searching some of the websites for the high schools right now because a lot of them will list all the clubs that they have. And so you can go into that fair with a plan. Here's 4 or 5 different clubs that I might want to join. And I always tell them, join right at the beginning of the school year, because when you walk into that first meeting, a lot of people will be new and it's a lot less intimidating than trying to go mid-year or in the spring when everything's always in process. Then I ask the question, especially for students who might be in 11th or 12th grade, what clubs have you already been involved in and how can you seek leadership roles within those clubs? I think that really is important. As you've been involved in something for a year or two, it's time for you to take that next step within the club to show leadership. Also doing a lot of career exploration in the fall, talking about what different things you're interested in, especially for some of the 8th through 10th graders. What classes are you enjoying? What's your favorite class to go to? Which one do you dread during the day? And then trying to start thinking about what career paths that might take. That might involve taking assessments. It might involve just kind of talking through and doing different webinars that are available online. And then, of course, college visits, great idea for the fall. And those can be done in person and they can be done virtually. So you don't have to drive to every campus or fly to every campus to see it. If it gets on your radar and you're interested, look and see what types of webinars they have in the fall, or do they have any online visits or tours that you can do? But of course, if you can start building in some of those in-person visits as well. I think I've said a million times, I think I said it yesterday, nothing beats a campus visit when you actually set foot on a campus and feel kind of like the vibe and the energy and the student body and can kind of see if it's a place where you feel like you would fit in. And, then start talking about what you might want to do next summer, because the summer planning actually starts in the fall. The internships, college coursework, volunteer experiences, a lot of these applications will start early on. So as September and October hits, I definitely will be working with my students to identify some of those different opportunities and just kind of keep an eye on timelines for application submission. My most important recommendation for anything you do in the fall is reflect on it. Keep a journal, a blog, write down what you learned. You want to make sure that you're not just listing things that you've done, but also listing why they were important to you. Sharing that piece of the puzzle is almost more important than sharing what you actually did.
Renee and Kristin, you talked a little bit about, you mentioned an assessment, and that got me thinking, but we're also talking about developing a narrative and finding out what your passion is. But the truth is, a lot of times kids come to us and they'll say, well, I'm not sure, or I have no idea what I want to major in. And so that got me thinking about the assessment you give and how helpful that is to kids who are unsure. I'm wondering if you could touch on that a little bit, and Kristin, if you want to chime in too, please do so.
Sure, I'm happy to just start, and then Renee can follow
Sure.
in. Last night I actually went over 2 assessments with 2 students. I have a lot of fun with them. They're both kind of personality modules that help students see what they're interested in and how, like, what kind of learner they are, and that also provides them with ideas for careers and things that they could be interested in. And I agree with Renee totally when she talked about 9th and 10th grade is really about exploration. I mean, life is about exploration, but really exploring in 9th and 10th grade, and then starting to dive into 1 or 2 things. A lot of people feel they'll come to us and they'll be like, well, I don't have anything. And then we'll start diving deep, and they are doing some things. This isn't about quantity, it's about quality. It's about showing a passion and an interest and diving deep in that. Renee talked about finding, leadership opportunities. Leadership can be it can be formal, like being president, but not everybody can. And it's also informal, like mentoring people or providing guidance on a team or in a club. And it's also just showing passion outside of school in whatever you're interested in. I mean, you could be I have students who do independent art on the side at home, and that's something that we're going to be capitalizing in their applications. So really thinking outside of the box in terms of where your interests are. Don't feel that you have to be limited to clubs or formalized opportunities. Those are wonderful, but there's also plenty of time to be doing things on your own.
I love what you said, Kristin, about that you don't have to be like the president or the treasurer of something to be a leader. When I used to review applications, I always marked leadership for someone who had been on a team or participated in something for all 4 years in high school. So even if you are not in a formal position, you committing yourself to that and rising through the organization just naturally shows that you are an example for other students who are joining. I'm sure being asked questions and guiding, not everyone will want or seek out those leadership positions, but they can also come just by really committing yourself. I like the way you said, I always say depth over breadth. So like dive into something as opposed, to doing many things, just a little bit. So those were all really good points.
Yeah, and it just reminded me of one thing really quick. I actually have a student who's writing his essay on being a passer. He's on the basketball team, and he passes. So people will think, well, that's got to be a negative. Well, actually not, because that's like the foundation of the team. And so he helps others be their best selves. So it's leadership
I
in
love
lots
that.
of, lots of a way. And so he's highlighting being a passer both on the court and then off the court. So
Oh my
yeah.
gosh, that's amazing. You know what else I wish that people thought about this more, and I think we've talked about it, Kristen, but part-time jobs.
Yeah.
Oftentimes students will discount those. Oh, and I work at the car wash or I work at the like to
Hmm.
me, looking at a part-time job, and especially the student in high school who has stayed at the same job for a while, really shows commitment. It shows time management because you're able
Hmm.
to, do your schoolwork and work. So that is something that's often discounted by students, but I also really thought was really important. That can be just as time consuming, if not more time consuming, than participating in a sport or performing arts or something like that at school.
Hmm. Being a bagger at Harris Teeter, that is a wealth of fodder for applications
I
and
agree.
essays.
I agree. That's funny.
So what I hear you're saying is that, if your grades or test scores aren't what you want them to be, but you have all these other rich experiences, that
Right.
helps to balance out. And you need to plan ahead and make sure that what you're doing
Right.
can position you in the best light. That makes total sense. And Renee, Kristen, thanks for mentioning the assessment. I love it too. And we use an assessment through our software called College Planner Pro that looks at 3 modules in terms of kids' interests in learning. And it's really, really helpful. And I think it helps them feel a lot
Hmm.
better about themselves when they see, oh my gosh, look at my strength. And that aligns with this careers. It all of a sudden helps kids to kind of open up about the possibilities. All right, so let's keep going and talk a little bit about demonstrated interest, because this is something else that kids can do. Renee, start us off.
Sure. So with demonstrated interest, I talk with this with a lot of families. If demonstrated interest means they're actions taken by students that shows a college that you're genuinely interested in attending. We have seen this sharp rise in applications over the years to colleges with test optional policies and things changing in the college landscape. And so while these colleges are receiving this really high number of applications, they still want to keep their admit numbers and rate as low as possible. So they really are looking to admit students who are likely to enroll at their school. And so for the schools that use demonstrated interest, not all schools do, but for the schools that do use demonstrated interest, it can really make an impact on a student's decision. Now, if a student is not qualified academically for the school, showing a lot of demonstrated interest will not change the tide. They are still looking to admit students who have shown that they can be successful in the program. But for those schools that have a number of spaces available or have some more qualified students than they have spaces available, demonstrated interest can really come into play. So the question is, what is it and how do they use it? So some schools, especially private colleges and some of the smaller liberal arts schools, will use demonstrated interest. And it's important because it is telling the school that you are interested in it. There are a number of different ways to show demonstrated interest. So I think I'm going to hand that over to Kristen and kind of maybe you can share some of the examples that you have, and we'll see if we have a similar list.
Sure, absolutely. I always say this is low-hanging fruit. If a
Yeah.
college is actually considering this as part of their decision-making process, we want to check in that box. So demonstrated interest can be shown in a bunch of different ways. First thing is most important would be like actually seeing the campus, taking an information session, going on a tour. Not every, obviously you can't fly and drive everywhere and be there. So that's why the internet is fabulous. Since the pandemic, colleges have gotten really
Mhm.
well versed at having virtual tours, having virtual events. So the schools that you're interested in, go into those admission pages, see what opportunities they have. Sometimes they have, virtual coffees, meet with the deans. I know Elon's having one really soon. Then also sign up for emails, open those emails. We always talk about AI becoming more prominent in all kinds of fields. Well, admissions, it's no different. And so AI can be tracking your activity, going to their website, opening the emails, signing up for the different events that they have. I think one of the other most optimal ways of demonstrated interest is when this fall, when those admissions officers are coming to campus, going to those admissions information sessions, introducing yourself to the admissions person, following up with a thank you, asking a question. That you can't underestimate the value of placing a name with a face also. And Renee's totally right. Smaller schools are usually the schools that track demonstrated interest the most, But you'd be surprised. JMU factors demonstrated interest, and that's a school with almost 30,000 students. So really doing your homework and looking and seeing who tracks it. There are also interviews. Smaller schools have interviews. I have all my students do the William and Mary interview over the summer, so that also shows. And I think Renee probably has some other really great ideas.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many different ways to show demonstrated interest, and it can really be super impactful. One of the things, as soon as a student, I have like a formal college list for a student, we know exactly where they're applying. I pull demonstrated interest into a report to see what schools consider it. We kind of make a separate list of those, and also schools that consider an interview. So we're considering both of those and making sure that we include that. And one of the things that I tell students to do if the school does track demonstrated interest is they track how many times you log into your admissions portal after you set it up. And so I tell them, like, every Monday, we're going to log into every school's admissions portal and just kind of poke around, because those schools really use those portals to release information, to let you know what's missing in your application. But they also, as students are checking in their eyes, they feel the student might be checking to get their admissions decision. Is it here? Is it ready yet? And so they're like, oh, this student's really interested. They've logged in, every week to check it. So I know there are some things like that. It does seem a little bit like a game, and I don't love that. But, if this school is high on your list and you want to really make sure that they know how interested you are, things like this can change the tide at times for students who might be on the bubble and be a borderline student.
How do a parent asked in the Q&A, how do you know if a college considers demonstrated interest?
Well, I pull the information from the common data set, which colleges report. They will report whether they use demonstrated interest as part of their admissions process, and how heavily they'll weight that, whether it's just considered or very important. Typically, if they do take it into consideration, almost always falls in the considered column. So you really don't know how much a school will use this particular field in making a decision. But to me, if they say they consider it at all, it's worth making that effort to add that as part of your application.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. All right. So one of the greatest forms of demonstrated interest is applying early decision. How is that different from early action and then regular decision? Kristin, I'll start with you.
Oh, thank you. You're totally right. Early decision is the biggest way to show demonstrated interest. Early decision is a binding contract between the student, the parent, the guidance counselor, and the school. If you are admitted to the school under their early decision option, then you must go to the school. The only way out of that is if you cannot a financial aid consideration, and you don't get the package you need in order to attend. Otherwise, you have to attend. And like everything in college admissions, like I said on Monday, it depends how powerful this can be. It depends on the school. Some schools use early decision a significant amount. Renee mentioned earlier about acceptance rates and yield rates. That's what colleges, the amount of students that apply and then those that actually attend, that equals what their yield rate is. Colleges put a big emphasis on what their yield rate is. And so if you're early decision, you're helping their yield rate. So usually private universities and smaller ones use early decision very powerfully. There are some schools that take over half their students in early decision, but then there are a bunch of schools that don't even have early decision, and they offer what's called early action or regular decision. Early action is a non-binding option. It just means that you're applying earlier, usually like a November 1st, or if you're applying to some of the southern state schools, it's an October 15th. And then you're just finding out your decision earlier, but you don't have to go. And then regular decision is usually in a January-ish deadline, and that is you'll find out basically around March or late February if you get into the school. So you usually have 1, 2, or sometimes even 3 options to apply to a school. Some schools even have what's called early decision 2, which is a January deadline, but it's also binding. So for students who apply early decision to one school, I have a student who just applied to Wake Forest early decision. She's going to find out very soon. And then if that doesn't work out for her, her plan is to apply ED2 to a different school. So it really doing your homework, finding out what the options are that the schools offer and what would fit most appropriately with your student is important. Renee, what are your thoughts?
I totally agree. The one thing I like to emphasize to students as well, though, is that not every student is ready to apply early decision somewhere. And that is completely fine. That really has to be a school that is your first choice. And, you know, if admitted, you're okay with drawing all your other applications. I think there's also a bit of power in early action in that, you know, as a former admissions officer, if I was reading an early action student because the deadlines are earlier, in my head, I already assumed this student had their act together because they were able to like go through the whole admissions process, get everything in on time. So the students that I'm working with, I think you're similar, Kristin, all early action if the school offers it. If you're not applying early decision, that makes sense, but early action if the school offers it, and then we really only do rolling or regular decision, you know, if that's early action is an alternative. You know, the goal here really is to set up a timeline, like get your list of schools, figure out what notification plan for each school, and then make a timeline on how to submit them. Because you don't just submit an early decision application and then wait to hear and not do anything else. You're working on all of these at the same time. You do the early decision first and get it in, but you're also doing all your applications simultaneously, kind of just in order of when they're due and making sure that everything is in at once.
That's so true and so important, because there are lots of students, Renee, that are like, okay, well, now I'm just going to wait and see. And we're like, no, we're not going to wait and see. And they're also calling like early action. I mean, Renee totally hit the nail on the head about the importance of early action, is really called the new regular decision for more schools. And you'll even see schools be super transparent, like Virginia Tech, that says that they're going to accept most of their applicants in early action. And if there's anything left, then they'll go to regular decision. So again, another reason to really look at how the school uses the different options available to apply.
Yep, for sure.
Renee, I like your idea of a timeline, and it kind of goes back to the parents who said, I'm kind of overwhelmed and I'm worried my child won't, you know, follow along and get everything done. And I had that same experience as a parent, even though, you know, I'm in education and that is my career. Helping my own child was completely different. And we also had a timeline, but getting him to do it was like ridiculous. I mean, it became like a lesson in frustration. And I said, that's it. You know, I need somebody, we need to make sure your list is correct and make sure this list is balanced, but also just really somebody to guide the process. That wasn't me. And then once I did that, like my life changed. It was so much better. But I'm sure you can relate with your own kids that it's very common.
Yes, I have two as well, exact same thing. I think sometimes adding that college counselor in or an outside person also like sets a certain time of the week. Thursday at 4, I'm talking with Renee about college, as opposed to, hey, have you done this? No, we'll do it tomorrow. Hey, have you, you know, like it's easier to kick the can down the road when it's just within your family, but when you have an actual appointment set with someone and they're driving, like when I go into a meeting with a student, I'm like, okay, here's my list for today. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to talk about these things. If you have things, I'm happy to discuss them as well. You know, so we kind of are working together, but there is somebody kind of driving the bus down the road, which I think is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone else to be accountable, that they have to be accountable to. It's very important.
Yes, for sure. Sometimes students also receive things differently from people who aren't their parents.
Absolutely.
I know my own kids were like
maybe
that.
Like 100% of the
All
time.
the time.
I was trying to say that as nice as possible.
All right, so let's keep going. So we talked a lot about differentiating factors, and that's what you do. You help kids to position themselves so that schools say yes. But also that starts with a balanced list. How do you help kids create this list that's balanced in all 3 ways?
Sure. I touched on this a little bit yesterday, but to kind of, for those who didn't see yesterday's webinar, we want to make sure when you're building a list that you have schools in all 3 buckets: reach, match, and likely. And reach are schools that your academic profile is just below or near the bottom of those who they admit. And then match is that you're really lining up with the academic credentials of the students that the school has admitted in the past. And then likely where your grades and SAT scores or things like that are really exceeding those who they've admitted in the past. So oftentimes when students come to me, they have a very top-heavy list. Many schools in the reach category, not enough in the match category, and very few, if any, in the likely category. So my job is to look at those schools that they have. I'll put them in buckets for them, and then we'll talk about what their list looks like and how do we balance it better. So then I'm going to bring in some suggestions. Here's some schools that I feel You may be competitive for admission. Here's some schools maybe you haven't considered that might fall into these other two categories. It is important to have a balanced list because it kind of reduces the stress of the process, knowing that, hey, there are some schools on my list that I do feel I have a possibility of being admitted into, and that kind of just brings the stress level down, all around. The other thing is so many students come to me with the same list that all of their friends have. And, every student is unique. They're looking for different things in a college. They want a different major in different things. Like, we really need to make sure that their list matches them. It's not a list that all their friends have. So it ends up being kind of the schools everybody's talking about, but there's so many amazing schools out there. So, I'm always, sending, what about this one? Think about this one. And many times they'll say to me, oh, I've not even heard of that school. And then they do research and they're like, wow, like this is a great fit for me. So that's kind of the importance of a balanced list.
I 100% agree with you on that, Renee. I think, as you said, people focus too much on the reaches when they really need to be focusing a lot on the schools that are the most likely. Like, having a list is because college admissions is not an exact science. Making sure you've gone and seen your likely schools or that you've done a ton of research is really important, because I have a bunch of students who, sure, they have a little bit more reaches, but I've surely made sure that those most likelies and even those targets are schools that they'd be excited to go to. I say to my students, you can't have any school on your list that you wouldn't be happy going to.
I totally agree.
Because it's a waste of their time. It's a waste of the application fee. So making sure that they've really done the research, seen the schools, and are happy with those most likelies. I have one student a number of years ago, it just reminded me of something, Renee, when you were talking about your experiences. I had a student who wanted to go in engineering. He wasn't really what one would consider a typical engineering student. And I remember giving him Duquesne, and he called it Duquesne. And he ended up going. He loved it once he went there, and then he ended up attending. So I 100% agree with you that really thinking outside of the box and being creative. The same 20 schools are on everybody's tongue. There are, like you said, so many schools out there, and schools that have some of the top programs in the country that people haven't even heard of in the things that you're interested in. So really doing that research.
I agree.
All right. So what about kids that need support services? Renee, can you touch on the different types of support kids can get in school?
Sure. So I work with a lot of students who have ADHD, who have learning differences. So I talk with them first about what type of support services they're receiving in high school and what are they looking for in college, because that may not always be the same thing. So kind of talking through that and having an understanding of what they would like out of a school. Because there's really three sort of categories that the services fall into. The first is accommodations, and this might just be like extended time on test or priority seating in the classroom. So just some, more minor things that might be helpful to the student. And then there's the service level, and the service level goes beyond those basic accommodations and often becomes a little bit more personalized or a little bit more frequent. You might have some regular meetings with a disability service coordinator or counselor. You might participate in like organizational skills training. Some of these will have additional costs. It just kind of depends on the school and may have a limited number of spaces, but again, depends on the school. And then there's the colleges that have comprehensive programs. And this is really where this is an extensive level of support for the student. It might be a combination of academics, social, career-focused support, and is designed for students who really need that more hands-on and consistent work with someone. They often have like a specialized community or academic support program for students or career training specific to these students. These almost always have an additional cost above and beyond tuition and a limited number of spaces available. So if a student is looking for this type of support, I always encourage them to reach out to the colleges early, learn what the application process is, what needs to be sent in, what are the deadlines, what are the spaces, just so they don't get their heart set on a school and may not be able to receive the level of support that they're looking for. That being said, Kristin, do you recommend that students, I get this question a lot and I'd love to hear what your response is. Do you recommend that students disclose ADHD on their application or any other learning difference?
So my philosophy is always, I look to the student. If the student feels comfortable talking about that, then absolutely. For many students, their learning differences, ADHD, being on the spectrum, whatever, is a really big part of who they are and makes them as special and unique as they are. So absolutely, if they feel comfortable doing it, I say I would. And there's an additional information section on the Common App where I have most of my students do it. And we talk about it in the frame of not as excuses for anything, but in terms of more celebration for what we've accomplished in light of all these things that we have going on. Just like we would with any other challenges that people face in life. I have a student, I normally don't recommend that we use our big essay for ADHD specifically, because students have so many things that are wonderful about them. But I actually, and every year, I have to change my rules, because I had a student wrote the most creative essay about her ADHD experience using her daytime planner. It is so filled with just humor. I was laughing out loud, and she did it in such an amazing way that I said, yeah, you have to talk about it. So I really defer to the student about it. And it has absolutely no stigma with regards to admissions offices. And I'm sure, Renee, you can also speak to that from your experience. But when I was at UVA, I love learning about that about a student, because it really just highlights, like, wow, look at all that they've done in light of the things that they've had to overcome.
I agree, Kristen. I also saw it when I was reviewing applications, when students would disclose to me maybe when they were diagnosed as well. That is super helpful, especially if they were
Yeah.
diagnosed in high school, because
Yes.
oftentimes I would see like a turn in the tide on grades, and I would, I'm looking for an explanation. Like, okay, why did things change, or why didn't you take a foreign language, or why, as an admissions officer, I had questions and I was going to look. So I often tell students, you're not sharing it as an excuse, you're sharing it as an explanation. And I love how you said celebration. Like, I'm going to start using that now, because I like that as well.
That's super helpful. Thank you both so much. And I just realized we're really running out of time, so we'll just kind of quickly get through these slides. And then I know Kathy wants to come on and say hello, introduce herself, and then we'll get to Q&A. But Renee, real quick, what do you do with kids that are like, we talked about this a moment ago, but they're just really struggling to get started?
Yeah, I actually just had this conversation with a student last night, and he's like, I know once I start, I'll be fine. I just need to start. And I said, I know. And I said, I talk about that with families all the time. Often when students are procrastinating, it's not because they are not wanting to. It just seems overwhelming to start. So my goal is always see where we are, see where we need to go, make a plan, break it down into smaller steps. And as small as possible. Even when I start talking about the essay, I tell them, write the first paragraph and then let me see it. So writing a paragraph seems so much easier than writing an entire draft. So if we can break it down into these smaller steps, but that also, you need to start as early as possible, so you have that time.
Makes sense. Thank you. And Kristen, I know you're a firm believer that there is a path for everybody. And we used to say there is a college for everyone, but really sometimes our kids, they'll consider colleges, but also other options. I'm wondering if you can touch on that real quick.
100%. I've had numerous occasions in the last 4 years that I've been with EC that a student will come, they're just like, I just don't know if college is the right thing for me. And that's okay. Our job and our philosophy, I think I can speak for Renee and our other consultants, is for you to have options. I mean, I'm in my late 50s. I don't necessarily know what I want to do with my life either. So having options, because you don't know how you're going to feel when graduation time comes around. So we pursue, for students who are really unsure, we pursue multiple paths at the same time. I've had students in the past, like, listen, let's go through the application process. Let's get those in. Let's see where you get in, and let's regroup at that point in time. We're also at the same time simultaneously looking at community college, and maybe looking at what to do with a gap year. A gap year is taking a year off between going to college and graduating from high school, because most colleges allow you to defer your acceptance. So let's go through the process. And then if next spring you feel like, hey, listen, I'm going to go work for a year. I want to go I want to, do this opportunity, or I think I just want to decide if this is the right path for me and I need to do some more self-exploration. Hey, let's defer for a year, and then you can revisit it. Our job is so that you have options out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen.
Sure.
And before we get to Q&A, I just wanted to let everybody know that tomorrow is the last day of our college week, and we'll be talking about the SAT and ACT playbook. prep scores, and test optional strategies for students. So I hope that you will join us tomorrow at 12. And people have asked if there's a recording, and yes, we will send that out tomorrow. All right, Kathy, real quick, I'd love to bring you in and for you to share a little bit about what you do, and if parents are interested in really learning more about the college application process, talking to you.
Sure. This was a great webinar. I loved getting to watch it. It was a fun way for me to have lunch today. Sure. So if parents are interested, they can scan the QR code. They can email me directly. It's Kathy@ectutoring.com. My name has a bit of a different spelling. You can see it there. And parents call and they just need help navigating the process. And they have questions maybe about course selection, about the balanced list, about extracurriculars, about identifying passions and interests, all sorts of different questions. They might have some specific concerns. So I, answer any questions that I can. I gather as much information from the family as possible about the student so that when we connect them to one of these fabulous consultants, they already have all this information about the student and they can hit the ground running and get going on that, planning out that roadmap to college.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy, for being here.
Sure.
All right, Melissa, I'd love to bring you on and see what questions that we have.
Hi, everyone. We have tons of questions in the chat box, so let's get started. Let's start with, my kid wants to go to my alma mater, but how important is it for me to be engaged? For example, joining the Alumni Association and showing interest that for me as an alumni.
You want to take that one, Renee?
Sure. So it really depends on the school. Of course, students, I always ask parents when I'm meeting with them, are they, do you have a school that you graduated from that you would like your child to attend? But it's not always the right fit either. So first of all, we talk about that. It might be on the list, but is that really the right fit for the student? But as an alumni, yes, of course you can, indicate that you're an alum of the school. That is actually a way to show demonstrated interest as well. That was something I used to look at, because if the parent is an alum, the student is likely to enroll. But the student still has to show academically that they can be successful at the school. That is not going to change the tide in an admissions decision if the parent is an alum.
But I think the parent wanted to know, should they join the alumni group or should they become more active?
It's hard to say yes or no because it depends on the school.
Okay.
Some schools, yes, will look at that, and other schools will not consider it at all. So to me, if I was going to, I would say, well, if I don't know, I will either ask the admissions office or I'm just going to join and be proactive about it and do everything that I can. But I can't guarantee that every school will take that into consideration.
Thank you, Renee. All right, another parent's asking, is it better to apply for early decision or wait, hoping that the fall grades increase my child's GPA?
So I'll start and then Renee can jump in on that one. So it really depends, as with everything in college admissions, that we keep saying, the word is it depends. It depends on your student's academic profile and how competitive are they for that ED school that they're looking at. How much does that school use early decision? How much of the class do they fill with that? With early decision. More often than not, and I think Renee will probably agree with this, that we advise students to apply regular decision when they need those senior first semester grades. Like if they have had, maybe a bumpy 9th and 10th, and they need to show a little bit of an upward trajectory in 11th, and they want to show that continuing in 12th. Sometimes we will tell students to wait and apply regular decision. However, that puts a tremendous amount of pressure on those first semester grades. So more often than not, we don't necessarily advise that, but there's always that option, especially if a student has shown, like Renee was talking earlier, like they've been diagnosed with ADHD late in 11th grade, and all of a sudden they have this quick turnaround, and we want to show that trend continues. So it depends. It's a long-winded answer. You need to look at the school. You need to look at your actual student with relationship to that school, and then also how the school uses early decision.
And one tip I tell students is that, if you are going to apply early decision, once your first marking period is over, your first quarter, have your school send an updated transcript. So at least they have those. When I was working at admissions, I would often call the school on early decision students and get the first marking period, and the student never even knew that we did it. But if they were on this like upward swing, I'm like, let me just check and see if this is going into senior, because schools do want to admit as many early decision students as possible. But if there's that unknown and they're unsure, at least looking at the first quarter can sometimes help. Many of those students, though, we would defer to regular decision and say, let's look at the first half of the senior year. So it really does depend a little bit on the specific transcript. And when that tide turned, or how much you actually need the senior year grades to help show you have that academic potential.
Thank you. All right, Anne, it looks like we are out of time. Do you want to stay on for a little bit?
We can take a couple more questions, Renee. Kristin, is that okay with
Sure.
you?
Yep, fine with me.
All right, great. Next question is from Jennifer. She says, when you're talking about having a balanced list and seeing kids that have top-heavy lists, do you typically recommend limiting the reach schools and simply adding more likely schools?
It really depends on how many schools are on the list. So if the student has a top heavy list, I have a student who has 7. She actually might have 8 reach schools on her list, which, they're dream schools for her. She wants to apply to them. She's willing to do the work, willing to do all the supplementals, and the extra essays, but we made sure that the rest of the list was also just as full. And so that's the key. That it is okay to be a little bit, heavy on the top, but you also need to be heavy in the middle and on the likely side too, so that it is balanced. That's why it's called the balanced list. So it depends on how many schools are on the list and where they fall within. But I do think for some of those students, it's okay to have that, but they also have to have realistic expectations. That is those conversations I have with students all the time. I know we're going to put this, but I want you to understand this is a reach school. I want you to have realistic expectations. I don't want their like hopes and dreams dashed. I want them to go into the process with eyes wide open.
And a follow-up question to that from Ashley, how many schools would you recommend that students have on their list?
This is one of the $1 million questions we always get asked. And again, it depends on the student. What is the composition of the schools on the list? Are they all schools? First of all, my number one criteria, and I think Renee agrees, is that you have to be happy and excited to go to every school on that list. I have a student exactly similar to Renee, is way top heavy, and she understands that by sheer acceptance rates, that those are going to be hard to get into. But she's excited about her most likelies, and she's okay with that. And so we only have, I think, three most likelies on the list, and that's fine because she really likes them. I have another student who he only has one safety, but it's one that he's super excited about. And his parent is a faculty member there, so he could have free tuition. So he's shooting for the stars for his other ones, but he knows that he can be going to that school. And so it just depends on the schools, and it depends on what the student's profile looks like.
In general, when a student asks me how many, if they want a number, because a lot of them do, I like to say 8 to 12. Like, to me, if I have that number of schools, I'm able to fit them in, the 3 buckets. But if you have 8 and they're all in the reach category, that's going to need to be 15. It's going to have to balance out. So I definitely agree with you.
All right, and our next question is from Catherine. What determines if a student is ready to apply early decision or early action? If they're not 100% sure, but they're worried that they're going to miss the slot if they don't do it, how do you help them decide if they're ready?
So for me, early decision, the first thing I say to a student is, if you are admitted to the school, are you ready to withdraw all of your applications from other schools, not receive any other admissions decisions, any other scholarship offers or financial aid packages? And if the answer is yes, then that's a good early decision school. Early decision is amazing if you really have that school that is your first choice. But if you're wavering, if you want to compare packages or scholarships or things like that, early decision is not going to do that because it takes away your ability to do that. Early action, to me, that's just makes sense. Get everything in on time, be able to enjoy your senior year because you've met all those early deadlines. Early action is just really the student getting the application in early and making sure the process is done. And again, I only have students do regular decision or rolling if they need to submit senior grades, or, sometimes we even find a school late in the process. Like, oh, I missed this, but hey, here's a new school we hadn't considered, and we'll add that in for regular decision.
All right, next question from Sif. Can you give some examples of some Virginia public schools that are using holistic admissions and some that are outside the area as well?
So for Virginia schools, they all use holistic. University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, William and Mary, George Mason, they all use holistic. Oh, except VCU, no. If you meet a certain GPA, you're basically in. And the same thing for George Mason in terms of if you go to school in Northern Virginia, there's a direct admit program for certain high schools. If you meet a certain GPA, you're automatically admitted to the school. You don't have to do the essay. So, and then with regards to holistic schools outside, like Renee mentioned earlier, most of the smaller private universities in the country are all holistic.
And Kristin, Ashley is asking, is that something that the school says on their website? How do you find out if they are holistic or not?
Yes, they say it. And we know because we're in the industry.
All right. All right. Lindsay would like to know, what is the right year of high school to start showing demonstrated interest?
That's a great question. Because schools track visits, it can really start anytime. Once you are on a school's mailing list, if you've gone to campus, you already kind of have an admissions account. So if you attend a campus visit between sophomore and junior year, that will go on your record. And so you can kind of start early on, but senior year, of course, junior into senior year is really when a lot of the things are offered to students, and there's a lot of opportunities for them to participate in things online and on campus. So that is a more heavy time, but really anytime. That's why I tell families, if you go to visit a campus and just do your own like walk around, or you meet a friend and you have lunch with them that goes there, stop into the admissions office, make sure they know you were there. They always have nice waiting rooms and sometimes great giveaways, but also they can track that you were there, and that will add to your demonstrated interest as well.
Great. All right. Marie Christine wants to know if you could talk a little bit more about the kids who shy away from leadership roles. For example, her daughter's a senior, has been in some of the same clubs and activities for all 4 years, but would showing something such as being a TA her senior year for her teacher be an example that she could highlight?
100%. That's a great thing. If I always have students they have study halls, I'm like, well, you're really interested in ceramics. You've taken ceramics through 4 years. Why don't you go to your ceramics teacher and see if you can help in the classroom, be a TA? That's 100% leadership. Leadership can also be seen just in the classroom. Maybe you led a big group project that you had in your APUSH class, and you were the one that did the presentation. That shows leadership. Or maybe you are on a swim team in the summer and you help some of the younger swimmers. Maybe you don't have a leadership role per se, like a formal name, but you're helping swimmers at the swim meet, and you're taking care of the little people, bringing them to their lanes and all the things. That all shows mentorship and leadership. Those are hand in hand, and those can be super compelling that you talk about in your essays or in your activities.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is kind of a follow-up question. Could you also use running your own business as an example of leadership? Her daughter has a baking business on the side.
100%. Definitely.
Yes. I love all the entrepreneurship that's going on out there. Like, I think it's fascinating. Students are doing such interesting things. I think that is wonderful ways to demonstrate leadership, and great essay topics. Really great essay topics. Yeah.
I think just to kind of sum up from what we've been talking about, Renee and I today, in that if your student doesn't necessarily have optimal grades and optimal scores for schools, it's really being creative and thinking outside of the box. You may not realize that the things that your kids is already doing are super compelling. Because remember, schools are trying to build communities. They're looking to see what your kid's excited about, what kind of impact they'll have in their school. And it doesn't always have to be these formal things that everybody else is doing. And that's same with the college list. Be creative, think outside the box. We've talked today a lot about that they're the same schools everybody's thinking about. Try to broaden your horizons, because there's so many great options out there, both school-wise and also what your children can be doing or already are doing that you may not realize it.
Thank you both. And it looks like we are out of time. So Anna, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Melissa. And Kristin and Renee, thank you as always for being my guest again this afternoon. I hope this was helpful to everybody out there. And if we can be of service, please let us know. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, and hope to see you tomorrow, our last day of college week, all about test prep. Take care, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.